September 1991, Madison Square Garden, New York City. 6 months after the most iconic national anthem performance in American history, Whitney Houston was back on stage, and 50,000 fans were packed into the legendary venue for what was supposed to be just another stop on her I'm Your Baby Tonight world tour. The Persian Gulf War had ended just months earlier, and America was still riding the emotional wave of victory, grief, and national pride. Whitney's Super Bowl performance of the Star-Spangled Banner had become the unofficial soundtrack of that entire era, selling over 1 million copies as a charity single. But what nobody in that arena knew was that sitting in the third row, clutching a folded American flag against her chest, was a young widow whose husband had died in the deserts of Kuwait just 3 weeks after Whitney sang that anthem. And what Whitney Houston did when she saw that flag would stop the entire concert, cancel the rest of her set list, and create a moment so powerful that every major news network would replay it for weeks. This isn't just a story about a concert. This is about the night Whitney Houston proved that sometimes being human matters more than being a superstar. Her name was Jennifer Patterson, and at 23 years old, she was learning how to breathe again. Jennifer had married her high school sweetheart, Sergeant Marcus Patterson, just 2 years earlier in a small church ceremony in Newark, New Jersey. Marcus was her everything. They had known each other since they were 14, and everyone in their neighborhood said they were destined to be together forever. When Marcus enlisted in the Army in 1989, Jennifer supported his decision even though it terrified her. He wanted to serve his country, wanted to make something of himself, wanted to provide a better life for the family they dreamed of starting. In August 1990, when Iraq invaded Kuwait and President Bush began deploying American troops to the Persian Gulf, Marcus was among the first soldiers sent overseas. Jennifer remembered standing at the airport, watching him walk toward the military transport, turning back one last time to blow her a kiss. She had no idea that would be the last time she would see him alive. Marcus's letters from the desert were full of hope and determination. He wrote about the other soldiers in his unit, about the scorching heat and the endless sand, about how much he missed her cooking and her smile. But most of all, he wrote about Whitney Houston. "You won't believe this, Jen," he wrote in late January 1991, "but we all gathered around a small TV someone managed to get working, and we watched the Super Bowl. When Whitney Houston sang the national anthem, I'm not kidding, grown men were crying. There was something about her voice, about the way she sang it, that made us all remember why we're here, made us feel like America was with us." I played that performance over and over in my head during the hard days. The ground war began on February 24th, 1991, and it was supposed to be quick and decisive. American forces, including Marcus's unit, pushed into Kuwait to liberate the country from Iraqi occupation. For 4 days, the world watched as coalition forces achieved what military analysts called a stunning victory. But victory always comes with a price. On February 27th, just hours before the ceasefire was announced, Marcus Patterson's convoy was hit by Iraqi artillery fire. He was killed instantly, along with 3 other soldiers from his unit. He was 24 years old. Jennifer received the news while watching television coverage of the war's end. 2 uniformed officers appeared at her door just as the news anchors were celebrating the ceasefire. The juxtaposition was cruel. America was celebrating victory while her world was ending. At Marcus's funeral, the military honor guard presented Jennifer with the folded American flag that had draped his coffin. As she held that triangle of stars and stripes, she remembered Marcus's letter about Whitney Houston's national anthem. She remembered how it had given him strength in the desert. And she made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone around her. She was going to give that flag to Whitney Houston. The months following Marcus's death were a blur of grief and survival. Jennifer moved back in with her parents because she couldn't bear to stay in the apartment she had shared with Marcus. Every corner held a memory. Every sound reminded her of his absence. Her mother worried constantly about her. She barely ate, barely spoke, and spent most of her days sitting by the window, holding Marcus's letters. The flag remained in its presentation case on her dresser, but Jennifer would take it out every night and hold it while she read Marcus's letters, especially the one about Whitney Houston's national anthem. Jennifer's best friend, Karen Morrison, was desperately trying to help her find a reason to keep living. In early September, Karen saw an advertisement for Whitney Houston's concert at Madison Square Garden. She bought 2 tickets without asking Jennifer, determined to get her friend out of the house for the first time since the funeral. When Karen showed Jennifer the tickets, Jennifer's reaction surprised her. For the first time in months, Jennifer showed a spark of something other than grief. "That's her," Jennifer whispered, holding the concert ticket like it was something precious. "That's the singer Marcus loved, the one who gave him strength." Karen had no idea what Jennifer was planning. She didn't know that Jennifer had spent the previous week writing a letter to Whitney Houston, explaining who Marcus was, what her anthem had meant to him, and why Jennifer needed to give Whitney the flag. She didn't know that Jennifer had carefully packed the flag in her purse, along with Marcus's photograph and the letter he had written about the Super Bowl performance. All Karen knew was that her grieving friend finally seemed to have a purpose, and that was enough. The night of the concert, Jennifer Patterson dressed carefully. She wore Marcus's favorite dress, a simple navy blue one that he always said made her eyes look like the ocean. She pinned his army insignia to her chest and carried the flag in a special bag that Marcus had once used for his military gear. As she and Karen made their way to Madison Square Garden, Jennifer felt her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had no plan beyond getting that flag to Whitney Houston. Security would never let her approach the stage. The flag would be confiscated if she tried to bring it past the barriers. But she had to try. She had promised Marcus, even though he would never know. Madison Square Garden was electric that night. 50,000 fans packed every seat, every standing room space, every corner of the legendary venue. The energy was different from a typical concert. This was September 1991, and America was still processing the emotional whiplash of the Gulf War. Victory had come quickly, but the cost was real. Over 300 American service members had died, and thousands more carried wounds, both visible and invisible. Whitney Houston represented something more than entertainment that night. She represented the voice that had unified the country during its most uncertain moment. When Whitney took the stage, the crowd erupted in a roar that shook the building. She opened with "I'm Your Baby Tonight," and the audience sang along with every word. Song after song, Whitney delivered the powerhouse vocals and commanding stage presence that had made her one of the biggest stars in the world. But Jennifer Patterson, sitting in the 3rd row with the folded flag on her lap, barely registered the music. She was scanning the stage, looking for an opportunity, waiting for the right moment. Halfway through the concert, Whitney paused to talk to the audience. She was wearing a stunning white gown that caught the stage lights like a cascade of diamonds, and her smile was radiant as she looked out at the sea of faces. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Whitney said, her voice warm and intimate despite the massive venue. "These past few months have been incredible. The response to the national anthem at the Super Bowl, the support for our troops, the way this country came together, it reminded me why I love what I do. Music has the power to heal, to unite, to give us strength when we need it most." The crowd applauded, and Whitney continued. "I know many of you here tonight have family members who served in the Gulf War. Some of you are service members yourselves. I want you to know that every time I sang that anthem, every time I thought about our troops overseas, I prayed for their safe return. I prayed for their families. And I prayed that somehow, in some small way, my voice could give them comfort." Jennifer felt tears streaming down her face as Whitney spoke. This was Marcus's voice, the one that had given him strength in the desert. And suddenly, Jennifer knew what she had to do. She stood up, holding the flag against her chest, and she called out in a voice that surprised even herself. "Whitney, my husband loved you. He died in Kuwait, and I need to give you this." The outburst caught the attention of security guards immediately. 2 large men began moving toward Jennifer's row, clearly intending to remove her from the venue. Karen grabbed Jennifer's arm, terrified that her friend was about to be thrown out or arrested. But Jennifer didn't sit down. She held the flag higher, and she called out again, louder this time. "Whitney, please. This is my husband's flag. He wrote to me about your anthem. It gave him strength before he died." The desperation in Jennifer's voice cut through the ambient noise of 50,000 people. Whitney, who had been about to start her next song, stopped and squinted into the audience lights, trying to see who was speaking. "Wait," Whitney said into her microphone, holding up her hand to stop the security guards. "Wait, let me hear her." The entire arena fell silent as Whitney walked to the front of the stage, shading her eyes to see better. "Ma'am, you said something about your husband?" Jennifer's voice was shaking, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "My husband was Sergeant Marcus Patterson. He died in Kuwait in February. Before he died, he wrote to me about hearing you sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl. He said it gave him and his unit strength. He said it reminded them why they were fighting." Whitney's expression changed instantly. The confident performer's smile disappeared, replaced by something raw and deeply moved. "Your husband, he died in the Gulf War?" Jennifer nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She held up the folded flag so Whitney could see it. "This is the flag from his funeral. I needed to give it to you, because your voice was with him when he died. Your voice gave him courage." Whitney stood frozen for a long moment, and the 50,000 people in Madison Square Garden watched in absolute silence as the superstar processed what she was hearing. Then, without hesitation, Whitney turned to her band and said something that shocked everyone. "Stop the show. We're stopping right here." Her tour manager's voice came through her earpiece immediately. Michael could hear him even without the earpiece, but Whitney ignored him. She walked to the edge of the stage and knelt down, reaching toward Jennifer. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Jennifer Patterson." "Jennifer, I'm going to ask security to bring you up here to me. Is that okay?" Jennifer nodded, unable to believe what was happening. Within seconds, security guards who had been about to remove her were instead helping her climb over the barrier and onto the stage. Karen watched in amazement as her grieving friend, clutching an American flag, walked across the stage toward Whitney Houston. When Jennifer reached Whitney, she expected to simply hand over the flag and return to her seat. But Whitney had other plans. She took Jennifer's hands in hers and spoke directly to her, though her wireless microphone picked up every word for the entire arena to hear. "Jennifer, tell me about Marcus. Tell everyone here about your husband." Jennifer was trembling, overwhelmed by the moment, by the 50,000 pairs of eyes watching her, by Whitney Houston's hands holding hers with such genuine warmth. She began, her voice barely a whisper. "He was the best man I ever knew. We grew up together. We were going to have children. We were going to grow old together. And then the war happened, and he wanted to serve. He was so brave, so proud to be a soldier." Whitney squeezed her hands encouragingly. "And he heard the national anthem?" Jennifer nodded. "He wrote to me about it. He said all the soldiers gathered around a television to watch the Super Bowl. And when you sang, grown men cried. He said your voice reminded them of home, reminded them why they were there, gave them courage to face what was coming." Jennifer pulled Marcus's letter from her pocket with shaking hands. "I brought his letter. Could you read it?" Whitney took the letter, unfolded it carefully, and began to read aloud to the 50,000 people listening in profound silence. "Dear Jen, you won't believe this, but we all gathered around a small TV someone managed to get working, and we watched the Super Bowl. When Whitney Houston sang the national anthem, I'm not kidding, grown men were crying. There was something about her voice, about the way she sang it, that made us all remember why we're here. Made us feel like America was with us. The desert is hard, baby. It's hot and scary and lonely. But when I close my eyes and remember that anthem, I feel strong again. I feel like I can face anything. Tell Whitney Houston, if you ever meet her, that she gave a soldier courage when he needed it most. I love you, Jen. I'll be home soon. Marcus." By the time Whitney finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. She carefully refolded the letter and handed it back to Jennifer. Then she looked out at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl because I love my country and I wanted to honor our troops. But I never understood the real impact until this moment. Marcus Patterson gave his life for this country. He died serving something bigger than himself. And his widow is here tonight to tell us that somehow, in some way, a song gave him strength." Whitney turned back to Jennifer. "You said you wanted to give me his flag?" Jennifer held out the triangle of stars and stripes, the flag that had been presented to her at Marcus's funeral. Whitney took it with reverent care, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Jennifer, this flag represents Marcus's service and sacrifice. It represents every soldier who has ever put on a uniform and said, 'I will defend my country.' This is too important, too sacred for me to keep. What Whitney Houston did next created a moment that would be replayed on every major news network for weeks and would become one of the most powerful concert moments in history. She walked to center stage, still holding Marcus's flag, and addressed the audience with a clarity and purpose that transcended entertainment. Tonight, we're going to do something different. I'm going to sing the national anthem again. Not the way I sang at the Super Bowl, but the way it should be sung. For Marcus Patterson, for every soldier who has served, for every family who has sacrificed. And I'm asking all of you to join me. Whitney nodded to her musical director, who immediately understood what she wanted. As the opening notes began to play, Whitney held Marcus's flag against her heart and began to sing. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light. But this time it was different. This wasn't a polished, rehearsed performance. This was raw, emotional, and achingly beautiful. Whitney's voice cracked with emotion on certain notes, and instead of trying to hide it, she let the vulnerability show. Jennifer stood beside her, crying openly, as 50,000 people rose to their feet. As Whitney reached the climactic final notes, the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, something extraordinary happened. The entire arena began singing with her, creating a chorus of 50,000 voices united in tribute. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was better. It was real. When Whitney sang the final line, "And the home of the brave," she held the note longer than she ever had before, pouring everything she had into that moment. Then she carefully, reverently, handed Marcus's flag back to Jennifer. "This belongs with you," Whitney said softly. "But I want you to know that Marcus's courage, his sacrifice, and his love for you will stay with me forever." Whitney announced to the stunned audience that she was establishing the Marcus Patterson Memorial Fund to support military families who had lost loved ones in service. She canceled the remainder of her planned set list and instead spent the next hour on stage with Jennifer, inviting other military families in the audience to come forward and share their stories. By the end of the night, over 50 families had joined them on stage, each carrying photographs, flags, and memories of loved ones who had served. The concert that was supposed to be about entertainment became something far more important. It became a healing space for a nation still processing the emotional aftermath of war. Major news networks covered the story extensively. The New York Times ran a front-page article titled, "When Pop Stars Become Healers." Barbara Walters interviewed both Whitney and Jennifer for a primetime special. But most importantly, Jennifer Patterson began to heal. She would never stop missing Marcus. But Whitney's acknowledgement of his sacrifice, her willingness to stop everything and honor his memory, gave Jennifer permission to grieve openly and begin moving forward. Whitney and Jennifer maintained a close friendship until Whitney's death in 2012. Jennifer became the director of the Marcus Patterson Memorial Fund, which has provided support to thousands of military families over the past 3 decades. Every year on the anniversary of that September night at Madison Square Garden, Jennifer would call Whitney, and they would talk about Marcus, about service, about sacrifice, and about the mysterious ways that music can heal the deepest wounds. When Whitney died, Jennifer spoke at her memorial service. She brought Marcus's flag, the same one she had tried to give Whitney that night, as she told the world what Whitney Houston had meant to a grieving widow and to thousands of military families who found comfort in her compassion. Whitney taught me that fame and talent mean nothing if you don't use them to lift others up, Jennifer said through tears. She stopped her entire show for me. She honored my husband. She turned my grief into purpose. That's the Whitney Houston I will always remember. This incredible story reminds us that the most powerful moments in life often happen when we stop performing and start connecting. Whitney Houston was at the peak of her career that night, but she chose to put aside her set list, her planned performance, everything she was supposed to do, to honor one soldier's sacrifice and comfort his widow. In doing so, she created a moment more powerful than any song, more memorable than any performance, and more healing than any amount of fame could ever be. True greatness isn't measured by record sales or sold-out concerts. It's measured by the moments when we choose compassion over convenience, connection over performance, and humanity over celebrity. Whitney Houston gave us one of those moments, and the world is better for it.